point, snow on the ground, the faint smell of turkey in the air. So let's get on our feet and worship the God who gives us these wonderful gifts.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars are made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. Your creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, a syllable empty your voice. Once you have spoken, all nature and sounds follow the sound of your voice. Ooh, and as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath. You all begin pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, the canvas of your grace. Your creation still obeys you, so alive. So alive. So alive. If the stars are made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your rain, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shine, and we'll sing again 100 million times. You chased out my heart through all of my failure. almost disappeared, where you lost your life so I could bind it. If you left the grave behind you so alive, I can see your heart and everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love and so alive, like you were in 100 billion eyes, though a measure could amount to your desire. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. you think where I would be if not for you, if not for you? And as far as eyes reach from the west, as far as east is from the west, so far your grace has carried me until I see you face to face, until at last I've won my race. Remind me you're not finished yet. I'll live in remembrance.
Father, as we live in remembrance, I pray that we would remember your love, that we would remember how much you care for us and how much you want us to grow closer to you. Pray this in your name. Amen. You have a seat. As we enter into our time of communion, we're going to take another soul care question on. As we said last week, we had 4 questions left for the year, but we've got Advent coming up, so instead of taking a question 2 weeks at a time, we kind of got to rifle them off here. So, I hope that you were able to get some deep breathing exercises in this past week. My pool cover is still on, which is good, but driving on 80 is still a thing. So I was doing a lot of deep breathing. This week, though, we switched gears. This week's question is, am I honest in all my actions and words, or do I exaggerate? Never, right? Never. Never once have I ever exaggerated. No, that's a lie. Have you ever known a fantastic liar? I don't mean someone who's like really good at lying. I mean someone who just tells outrageous lies. I did in high school. This kid lied about everything, right? He told us that his first car was a Ferrari that needed to stay in the garage because his dad didn't want it to get wrecked in the school parking lot. He also told us that he was on track to become valedictorian until all the teachers one day had this meeting and conspired against him and decided to fail him. His most fantastic lie is my favorite because he came to my friend Brian and I, my best friend. We were in chemistry class and we had some downtime in class. He came over and he knew that we were on the baseball team, that we liked baseball a lot. So he thought, why not try and become friends with these guys? He came over and he said, hey, I know you two like baseball. Would you ever like tickets to a Cubs game at Wrigley Field? And we're like, well, yeah, sure. Like, why are you doing this? He's like, well, my dad, he's got season tickets to the Cubs. Believable, right? And we're looking, like, we've got some games that we can't go to, so we're looking to give the tickets away. We're sitting here, like, kind of stunned. We're like, yeah, absolutely. We'll for sure go to a baseball game, especially if it's for free. Where are the seats? He said, they're right behind the pitcher's mouth. And me doing the math on this, I'm like, right behind the pitcher's mouth is second base. There are no seats there. So I'm like, I kind of jumped in. I'm like, oh, you mean the bleachers, like center field? Like, that's amazing. Yeah, those are great seats. We will absolutely take those tickets. He goes, no. Way better. These are right behind the pitcher's mouth. What are you talking about? If you zoom in on a picture of Wrigley Field, you'll actually see that there's a small netted area right behind the pitcher's mound underneath the crown. Our seats are there. You get to be part of the action. What he didn't think about was if that was true, and those seats really were in the ground behind the pitcher's mound, you'd get a great view of the pitchers, but the entire game. We called his bluff, said, no, that's not true, and a friendship never developed, right? When you deal with someone who lies a lot, it's hard to trust anything that comes out of their mouth. Those people struggle with things just like anybody else does. So when they actually need to share something that is hurting them or something that they need to talk through with someone else, it's hard to take what they're saying with any grain of salt. Like it's hard to believe them. It's hard to help them because you don't know what's true and what's exaggerated. So, my encouragement to you for this week is not to seek out the liars in your life and confront them and be like, you need to stop lying, right? It's not the way we should do it, especially this week when you deal with family at Thanksgiving. At the Thanksgiving table would not be the time to say, Uncle Al, it's time to talk about your lying, right? But helping a liar to realize how it affects the relationships, how it affects everything that they do, can be helpful. Maybe if you're looking around, you're like, I don't know any liars. Maybe you're the liar. Maybe be careful about what you're saying. Instead of, especially around Thanksgiving, I'm sure we all have a one-upper in our family, right? You tell a story and then there's always a follow-up that just a little better than your story. Maybe if you're that one-upper, sit back. You don't need to exaggerate your stories. You don't need to have the fish story, right? Yeah, I caught a fish once, it was this big, and then every time they tell the story, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, when in reality it's still only this big, right? So again, show kindness and love to someone who you know, maybe they're not outrageous lies all the time, but little lies that get them into trouble in relationships. Maybe you hold your tongue. Think about what you're saying before you carelessly exaggerate the story for no good reason other than trying to make yourself look good. A final way that we can look at this is with your intentions. I am perpetually late, and I fully admit that's my fault. It's never my intention to be late. Dinner's at 5. Okay, I'll be there. 5:15 rolls around, where's Brian? Yeah, he's still not here. It's never my intention to show up at 5:20, but when there's a 30-minute drive ahead of you and you leave at 4:57, you can't get there in time. So maybe if you're like me and you have these Thanksgiving plans with family coming up this week, take that opportunity to, instead of saying, yeah, I'll be there at 5, and then showing up at 5:30 or whatever, take the time to make your words match your actions. Don't exaggerate your intentions. And also maybe hold those people accountable for those people who are showing up late or doing stuff like that, saying that they'll do something and then they don't follow through with it. Hold them accountable, because that's me, and we need help. We're gonna have about 30 seconds here to kind of think through one of those things. Spend some time talking to God. Maybe for the opportunity to have a loving conversation with someone about this issue, or again, you're someone who constantly exaggerates stories, or quite frankly, lies a lot. Start thinking about how you can start attacking this sin in your life. After that, the song will begin to play, and you can go to either the 2 stations in the back or the 2 stations up here in the front to receive communion this morning.
great words to end on. Thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus, for what you did, forgiving our sins, giving us eternal life. Thank you. Our servers are going to come now and receive the offering. While they do, we're going to run through a few reminders for you. It's funny, so I taught Amanda Freeman after church at the door. Amanda's about a month away from having twins. And so, they're moving to Thanksgiving with all of that. And it reminded me that you were due at Thanksgiving. And it came December 12th. That's a little
Late
bit,
from the very beginning.
that's a little bit after Thanksgiving. Yeah, those were long days. I remember them well. Anyway, it's funny, you mentioned this whole idea of confronting people about lying and, that kind of thing. Does not normally go well. In fact, you probably won't normally get the reaction you want. You'll normally get the person doubling down on the lie rather than, confessing and saying, yeah, that's a problem. You realize what it does for our relationship. But I think it's still important to kind of sometimes pull a person back into the reality of what's real. I'm a little kid walking home from school, first or second grade. Walk several blocks home, and I'm coming up Locust Street, and I find a robin's egg, half of a robin's egg. It's like, oh, this is so cool, half a robin's egg. Holding it in my hand, walking down the rest of the street. I come into the house, and I go, Mom, look what I found. And she, she kind of sighed, she's like, oh, that's neat, that's robin's egg. I said, yeah, it was whole, and then it opened, and the bird came out, and it flew away. And my mom went, oh, that's the sweetest thing, that's really neat. And for years, I thought I really got away with that one, I think I needed to be brought, I would have been better served to be brought into the reality of the moment that my mom knew that bird did not fly away. But I was kind of a weird kid, though. I was telling Sherry before church, I didn't know when I was little that when you hum, other people can hear it. So I was sitting in class, teacher, who's humming? Oh, you can hear that? Yeah, so anyway, sometimes we need to be brought into reality, and it's helpful. So anyway, hey, this thing up here. First 4 links are kind of become our permalinks now, okay? You can click right now, go to the Bible app, so that you can follow the scripture we're using. You got the Old Testament reading. You can watch live, although I would not recommend that right now, because it's about a 45-second delay, and you get very confused. And then you can catch the podcast on Monday. A membership seminar coming up in January. You can also get involved in making coffee. So there's all this cool stuff. You have some fun, though. God added to the fun today, which is really neat.
I love that day.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of people come up to me before first service and say, hey, we're still playing football today? I was like,
Absolutely.
yep, sure are. Little snow's not going to stop me. My dad would disown me being a Buffalo guy if I canceled football because of like a half inch of snow. All right, so we are going to go ahead and play flag football today over at Shannon Junior High. We're going to use their soccer field over there and have a lot of fun. That's from 12 to 2. I know that's, especially leaving second service, it's going to be tight. So if you need to go grab lunch, get changed, whatever, and meet us over there and you're a little late, that's totally fine, right? Don't think that, oh, I can't make it at noon, I'm not going to show up. Now, if you show up at like 1:45, we're probably all going to be laying on the ground, frozen, and on a rep. So don't do that. But if you come a little late, that's totally fine. Then piggybacking off that, we have an incredible night planned with Revive. We have our Thanksgiving dinner created by Chad Haug, and I'm so...
He sent me a picture yesterday of the turkey that he smoked. I wanted to lick my phone. It looks fantastic.
Yeah,
So
after first we went out and we were bringing in like some of the pop, and he's got this big bin of something else, and I go, oh, what's in there? He's like, oh, this is just a pie. I'm like 8 pies. I'm like, oh. Right, so they are safely hidden away. Don't start looking for them, right? We gotta save them for later. That we are extending Revive a little longer tonight because of the meal and just getting some time to hang. So it is from 5 p.m. to 8 tonight. And yeah, this is a perfect opportunity for you to invite a friend to come along on a no pressure night where we're just going to be spending time, getting to know each other and hanging out. So go ahead and do that for sure. Students, we also have this Wednesday off of Refuge, and then next Sunday we will be taking Revive off. Because I know there's just a lot of family stuff going on, people going places, and yeah, we're not going to tear families apart, right? So the next week we are off for students, but then we get right back into it.
every year for us, Christmas Eve ends up being a little bit of a complicated thing. You know, depending on when it falls, like last year it was on Sunday, and so that got confusing what do we do with that. And we always want to pick like the best time and all. And So we've been debating, like, when to hold services, how many, and all that, how does childcare work, and everything else. Having this conversation the other day with Dave Morey, we're talking about ways to best leverage the entirety of what God has given us. How do we get the full redemptive potential out of the whole building? And so what we decided to do, Sherry's going to bring up this slide, it's kind of fun. We're going to be one church all together at the same time. But if we all crowded in here, we wouldn't fit. We, get everybody in, it would be very, very tight. And so we're looking at the experiences and saying, why don't we offer two different Christmas Eve experiences, but all at the same time? So in here, you'll have kind of that traditional contemplative candlelight service with live flame, the whole works. And then in the gym, we're offering more of a family fun experience with glow sticks instead of candles, which is going to be so cool, passing the glow stick along or whatever. And having an environment where your child will actually be able to come and enjoy being with you and being with friends, because, Christmas Eve is about Jesus and it's about the family that we are. So we're trying this out. It's going to be offered at 3, and we're doing 3 based on what's happened the last umpteen years. So basically, 3 o'clock is always our best attended service. I mean, I would love to do 7 o'clock at night when it's dark. I'd love to do midnight.
You'd be dark at 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock is people's favorite time. So we're doing one service 3 o'clock, but 2 different spaces. We're not going to tell you, it's not as if, hey, if you got a 5-year-old, you got to go over there, or if you're 85, you got to come in here. You can go where you want, okay? But offering 2 different ways of celebrating the birth of Jesus, one place, same time. I think it's going to be a great day.
Yeah, learning about that this week is really cool because, again, being with family and with friends over the coming week, it's a perfect time to set up that invitation for a month from now. So you kind of start that steady drip of, hey, I want you here with me and with us.
It's a great point. So thanks. Very good. Let's talk to God. Father in heaven, now as we turn to your word and try to understand it, I pray that we do more than intellectually grasp it, but that we would really let it sink down and reside in our hearts, that we would allow your law to be written on the flesh of our heart. We love you, Jesus, and thank you. Amen. Our society has certain standards and laws designed to guard purity. The whole department of the federal government, the Food and Drug Administration, exists for the sake of guarding the purity of our food and of our medication. And that's really important. However, sometimes their standards for what counts as pure, it's a little bit surprising, okay? The following food standards, I'm told, are FDA approved. I'm told. I found this on the internet. So you're not always sure what's really true, but it makes for a great sermon intro. And then after church, a food inspector meets me at the door and says, no, it's really true. All of a sudden, this got real, okay? So, apple butter. If apple butter averages 4 or more rodent hairs per 100 grams, or if it averages 5 or more whole insects, not counting mites and aphids, those are okay with the U.S. government, okay? The FDA will pull it from the shelf. So think about that the next time you're slathering apple butter on your biscuit at Cracker Barrel. Good. Yeah. Mushrooms. I love mushrooms. I don't think I love mushrooms anymore. 15 grams of mushrooms are okay unless they contain an average of 20 or more maggots of any size. So, less than 20, eat up. Okay, fig paste. I'm so glad. I've never even seen fig paste, and I will never use it. If there are more than 13 insect heads per 100, the FDA will toss it. Apparently, the rest of the insect is okay. They must not want us to look at their little faces as we're chewing on our fig Newtons. I don't know. Coffee beans. This one kind of gets closer to home, right? You're already jittery. Now I'm really getting straight. Coffee beans are only withdrawn from the shelf if an average of 10% or more are insect infected. Hot dogs. I'm not even going to go there. It's not worth it. If they took all the impurities out of a hot dog, you'd eat a bun. And the bun's not good for you anyway, right? Oh, my word. All things being equal, we prefer purity. We like our coffee 100% insect-free. We prefer the pure stuff. When it comes to our food, we are very much in favor of purity. But when it comes to our lives, we give ourselves a fair degree of latitude. After all, we're only human, we say, right? We just can't help it. We're prepared to put up with a little lower standard of purity when it comes to our lives. But here's the thing. Unlike the FDA that is comfortable with this sliding scale of purity, God's definition of holiness is 100% pure. God is perfectly holy. 100% pure. And we are not. We are impure people, desperately seeking a way to grow more like God, to grow pure, to grow in holiness. How in the world do we learn to do this? If you've been following along in the Bible reading through the Bible Project, one of the things that's really cool, the videos that they show to teach along the way. And this week they had a teaching on holiness. And the fact that when we're impure and touch something, we make it unclean. But when God's purity touches us, it makes us holy. His holiness transfers to us. The answer to how we become holy, we walk with the God who is holy, and he changes us. First, he makes us holy or pure through the cleansing power of his grace. And then he teaches us to grow in holiness as we learn to walk in his ways. We become holy before God when we enter into a relationship with Jesus, who paid for our sin because we wouldn't be able to do it. That is our position. We are holy. And at the same time, we continue to grow in the practice of holiness throughout our lifetimes. Here is God's calling for all of us. Leviticus chapter 11 says, I am the Lord your God. You must consecrate yourself and be holy because I am holy. He ends that part of the passage by saying, therefore you must be holy because I am holy. The truth revealed in the book of Leviticus peels back the facade of self-righteousness and reveals the true condition of our hearts and lives. The message of this book is both painful and freeing. It is painful because it shows us the depth of our sin. And it is freeing because it reveals a God of holiness who has the power to make us more like his Son than we ever dared to dream. In Exodus chapter 19, we come to the foot of Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Here we see a ragtag group of frightened, grumbling, fugitive slaves. They have no real sense of identity yet and no clear knowledge of God and who he is. They are thoroughly impure. They're ready to run back to Egypt at the first sign of a problem. What is amazing is that God is banking his hopes to redeem the world on these people. God longs to teach these people another way of life besides grasping and clutching and grabbing in the way that they've grown accustomed to. In an effort to help them see the magnitude of his plan, he says this in Exodus chapter 19. He tells Moses, give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. Remember, when you're reading, that's the same God. Jacob becomes Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give the people of Israel. You can almost see this fearful group of wanderers standing in stunned amazement as they start to realize God is actually serious about this. His plan to impact and reach the whole world with his love is going to be built around this group of people. And to accomplish his purposes, his people will have to become acquainted with the concept of holiness. God invites us to be holy, just like him. What is holy? What does that mean? Well, in order to understand the term, it basically means that it's something that is set apart. It's unique. It's used differently than anything else. It's got a special meaning, a special purpose over here. Something that is reserved for a special use, and it's not used for anything else. Now, I want you to think around your house right now. Whether it's cooking or cleaning or building, some tool you have, there's something you own that you use distinctly for just that thing. And if your kid grabbed it and used it for something else, you'd go, no! Because you have a purpose for which you use that item. There's a sense in which you could say that item is holy. That item is set apart for a particular use and for only that use. It's only later that we begin to understand the word holy in the sense of moral purity. In the Bible, many things are said to be holy. But Moses was standing on holy ground. The mountain of God is called holy. In the New Testament, the word saints is simply the plural of the word holy. Holy in Greek is hagios. The plural is hagioi. So look to the left and look to the right. You're staring at a hagioi today. Isn't that kind of, why did you say, wow, you're one amazing hagioi. Go ahead and tell that person, I love you. You're a great hagioi. Do it, really. I'm serious. This is kind of fun. Yeah. Now you know a Greek word that you can kind of splash around at Thanksgiving. Well, you know in the Greek, hagioi means. Yeah, exactly. That's pretty cool. It's simply the plural of saying this is a group of people set apart for my unique and special purposes. God spells out what holiness looks like in the form of 10 commandments. And before he gives them a word of the law, God reminds them of his love. We saw it in that passage. He says, I carried you on eagle's wings. It's an image of supporting them. You are a treasured possession. You are a kingdom of priests. You are a holy nation. The 10 Commandments teach us that obedience is not an obligation, it's not a duty or a grudge. It is totally and completely a response of love. It's a way of saying, I love you, God. When we are holy, when we are pure, our choice to obey is a way to show God our love. As the law is about to be given and the people are about to meet with God, they have to be prepared to meet with them. So in Exodus 19, the Lord says to Moses, go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down on the mountain of Mount Sinai as the people watch. Now, you look at that, and we understand from the passage certain limits are put on the mountain. They're not even to touch the mountain, or they will die. And he also tells them to prepare for the meeting. He says, get cleaned up. Wash your clothes. Now, you look at that and you're like, really? Wash your clothes? That's what we're supposed to do in order to meet God? Do the laundry? Washing your clothing was not about clothing. It wasn't about clothing. It was about preparing. It was about mentally and spiritually preparing to be in the presence of God, conscious of the presence of God. This week we're preparing for Thanksgiving. I mean, it's not just like any other day, is it? It's not just a normal Thursday. It's a special day with a special meal. You might say it's holy. Some of us are already making preparations for that day in a way that we don't make preparations for any other meal. There I was at Jewel last night looking at that big old bin of frozen turkeys, trying to pick out that perfect 15-pounder for 99 cents. It is now sitting in my freezer, ready for that unique day, set apart for a special purpose. And preparation is required for that day. You see, for us, Sunday is just not another day. It is a day set apart. It is a day that you might say is holy. It is sacred. It is a day we come to meet God. And so here's the question for us today. How do we get ready? In what way do we wash our clothes? In what way do we get our minds and hearts ready to be with God's people in the conscious presence of the living God? And maybe it's something as simple as, do we think about being here before we're here? Do we actually give it a thought, or we just kind of show up and sit down and go, oh yeah, I'm at church? Or do we get mentally prepared for, I'm about to spend time in God's presence with God's people? Do we make sure that we leave early enough that Sunday morning isn't a total rush, that by the time you get to the parking lot, your family's all yelling at each other and just like, let's go to Denny's, I can't do church today. Although technically you could call this Denny's. But anyway, do you use Saturday nights well? Yeah, my name's Dennis, in case you don't know. Do you use Saturday nights well? Are you up till 4:30 and then show up at church and expect to stay awake while I talk for 30 minutes? Good luck with that. It's not going to happen. There are simple ways, these are simple ways that we wash our clothes, so to speak. We prepare for a unique meeting with God. So what does holy mean? Set apart, reserved for special use, designated for a special purpose. Objects in the Bible that are declared holy aren't holy in and of themselves. Only God, in and of himself, by his nature, is holy. And only God can make something holy when he touches it. He transfers his holiness. Objects become holy when they are set apart by God for his use. Something unique and important happened in Israel's understanding of holiness as time passed. The holiness that sets God apart from all else began to be understood as his moral excellence, his blinding purity, his perfect character. This God was completely set apart from sin. There was no sin in him or near him. In C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicles, one of the characters, Lucy, here's a description of Aslan, the lion, who Lewis clearly intends to be a picture of Jesus. If you ever read the books, Jesus is all over that. It occurs to her for the first time that she's going to be nervous when she meets this lion, this magnificent beast, face to face. Mrs. Beavers, one of the talking animals in the land of Narnia, says to her, "Oh, you will be nervous, dearie, make no mistake. If anyone can appear before Aslan without knocking knees, they're either braver than most or just plain silly." Lucy asks her then, "Well, then is he safe?" Mrs. Beavers replies, "Safe? Don't you hear what Mrs. Beavers tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he is good. He is the king, I tell you." Now here's the problem. This holy God is in a relationship with a group of people at the foot of the mountain, and they are steeped in sin. He is also in a relationship with us, and we are no less tainted by sin than the people we read about in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. Since the fall, every human being, with the exception of Jesus, has been marked by sin. We find ourselves torn. We are drawn to holiness. We're drawn to God. We hunger for him. But at the same time, we're afraid of him. We long for him. We know we need him. Yet we fear that we will be rejected by him in his holiness. Deuteronomy 4:24 says, "The Lord your God is a consuming fire." That's terrifying. Exodus 20:18-20, we read, "When the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horn, when they saw the flashes of lightning and the smoke billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance, trembling in fear. And they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen. But don't let God speak directly to us or we're going to die." Moses says, "Don't be afraid, for God has come in this way to test you, and so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning." As the people stood at a distance, the Bible tells us, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. Look at Moses' response. It is as if he's saying, who said anything about safe? He's coming to put the fear of God in us so that we'll be done with the foolish and destructive path of sin. Of course he is not safe, but he is good. He is the king, of course. Don't be afraid. Draw close to him and become holy, even as he is holy. There's an interesting reaction recorded throughout the Bible when people encounter God's holiness. It is a constant theme of Scripture. It does not change. When people encounter our holy God, they are overwhelmed and they are undone by the true sense of their own sinfulness. Isaiah in chapter 6 says, "Woe to me," when he encounters God. "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Another version says it this way, "My destruction is sealed, for I am a sinful man and a member of a sinful race." In Luke 5:8, responding to the purity and power of Jesus, Peter says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Each one of us needs to come to the mountain. And at the foot of the mountain, we need to see God in all of his power and glory. We need to fall on our faces in the radiating light of his holiness. and be overwhelmed by the reality of our sin in light of his purity. We need an Isaiah moment when we cry out, woe is me. These are the moments when we stop making excuses. We stop rationalizing. We stop defending the indefensible. But you know what many of us do? The problem with holiness is that we do not like the way it makes us look. We do not like the sin it reveals, the impurities, the defects, and the shortcomings. So what do? Rather than comparing ourselves to the perfect standard, to God himself, rather than exposing ourselves, our true selves, to the holiness of God, we instead look for someone else who's doing a lot worse. And we say, I'm doing a lot better than that. Guess I'm not as bad after all. Reality is we can only make ourselves feel better by looking down or looking to the side. It's the upward look that we avoid, and it's the upward look that we need the most. The problem with holiness is what it reveals. It reveals the real you, and it reveals the real me, and we'd rather pretend that person just doesn't exist. So let's turn to the giving of the law there on Mount Sinai, these 10 commandments. On this mountain, God speaks. He gives the 10 commandments, the cornerstone of the ethical guidelines for his people. These teachings have quite literally changed the world. What I'd like to do is highlight some of the questions often raised by the 10 commandments. Hopefully either answering a question that you have or equipping you to be able to answer the question when someone else raises it. So the first question is this. Were Old Testament, pre-Jesus people saved by obeying the 10 commandments? Were the 10 commandments the way of salvation in the Old Testament? Many people, many Christians believe the Bible teaches two ways to get to heaven. The Old Testament way and the New Testament way. The New Testament way, of course, is through faith in Jesus as forgiver and leader. The Old Testament way was perfect, 100% lifetime obedience to the law. It was as if there were two gods. The Old Testament God, the God of the law, and the New Testament God, the God of grace. The God of the law required perfect obedience, and the God of grace finally realized that this was humanly impossible. It's not possible to obey the law, so he came up with plan B, Jesus, the payment for sin. Good, now we're okay. The 10 commandments were not given as a means of salvation. They were not given so people could earn God's grace, so they could earn God's favor. Grace, by its very definition, is not able to be earned or deserved. It is something I am given that I do not deserve. They were not given a list of rules to be followed in order to earn a relationship with God. Here's the thing. The law was given as a definition of what it means to have a relationship with God. They were given so people would have an idea, a picture of what a covenant relationship with God looks like. The law defines who God is and who we are in relationship with him. He was not saying, do this and I will love you. He was saying, if you love me, this is what you'll be like. Do you hear the difference? There's a huge difference. We tend to see the 10 commandments as just a list of do's and don'ts. They need to be understood in light of the first line of the commandments. I am the Lord your God. This law was a loving reminder of God's presence with them. It's not just a list of rules. It is the definition of the covenant relationship God has with his children. When we see the law this way, we begin to understand far more clearly why Moses takes those stone tablets and comes to the bottom of the mountain and shatters them. He shatters them because it's a picture of the shattering of the covenant that the people were already doing in their disobedience. So no, the law of the Old Testament is not a unique path to salvation. In fact, when the Bible speaks of the salvation of Abraham, here's what we read. Romans 4:3, Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. James 2:23, Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He even called him a friend of God. Going back to Genesis 15, that covenant chapter, the covenant walk that we saw God took, we read, Abraham believed God, the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. He did not count him as righteous because of his obedience. He did not count him as righteous because of what he did. He counted him as righteous because of his faith. The Old Testament way and the New Testament way are the same way, by grace, through faith in a Messiah. They were looking forward to the coming of the Messiah. We're looking back on the fact that the Messiah has already come. But both accept the Messiah, both accept Jesus by faith. If anything, the law demonstrated just how impossible it is for humans to be perfect. It was screaming, you need grace. You need grace. You can't do this on your own. Question number 2. Now, ignore the slide, because for some reason we have 3 question number 1s. It's number 2 on my script, but it didn't transfer. I don't know why. And I did it. It's nobody else's fault. So you've been reading Leviticus. And I tell you what, you read Leviticus, and you find yourself asking, what's up with that an awful lot, right? I mean, it's kind of like, are you kidding me? Really? What in the world? Why is there so much detail in the law? I mean, you're reading along, and you know, for most of us, let's be real honest. If you're doing through the whole Bible reading, you do Genesis, you do Exodus, whoop, Deuteronomy. You just kind of skip. Leviticus and Numbers, you're like, yeah, whatever. It's kind of like the genealogies. Yeah, I know they're there, but boom, go to the next. Why in the world does the law go into such precise and at times seemingly absurd detail? You might even ask, if God is only concerned with the heart, and we believe God's concerned with the heart, why do we give so many details in the law? Let me just give you a few that end up being a little bit confusing, okay? This is about food. Of the small animals that scurry along the ground, these are unclean for you. The mole rat, the large lizard of any kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the common lizard, the sand lizard, the chameleon. All these animals are unclean for you. If any of you touch the dead body of such an animal, you will be defiled until evening. Now, I'm just kind of looking at that list, and I'm thinking, I did not need a biblical command to get me to not eat a gecko. Nothing about me wants to eat a gecko. Any of you snack on a gecko? We didn't need this verse. Geckos. We're not gecko people, right? I mean, it's kind of funny. So in Florida, I lived in Florida. I was a youth pastor there. You know those little lizards that they have in Florida, the ones that do push-ups? It's kind of fun to watch them. They just sit there, dang. I could do push-ups like those lizards. I'd be in great shape. So my youth group kids, they used to take those lizards and pinch their jaw and put it on their tongue, like that. And then they nip off the body. Okay? So you'd walk up to a kid and the kid go, and there'd be a lizard head on its tongue. I wish I'd known this verse back then. Stop chomping on the geckos. Anyway, laws about cleanliness. Leviticus 13. If a man loses his hair and his head becomes bald, he is certainly ceremonially clean. And if he loses hair on his forehead, he simply has a bald forehead. He is still clean. It's too easy, Don. I'm sorry. It doesn't say anything about shaved heads. So I'm not sure if you're clean or unclean. I'm not sure the way it works, but anyway. Laws about farming. When you're harvesting your crops and you forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, don't go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the orphan, the widow. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. And when you beat the olives from your tree, don't go back and beat the boughs twice. Leave the remaining olives for foreigners, orphans, and widows. When you gather the grapes in your vineyard, don't glean the vine after they are picked. Leave the remaining grapes for foreigners, orphans, and widows. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. That is why I'm giving you this command. So, reading through the Pentateuch. You're going to find laws about what to do when someone is gored by an ox. You'll find a law about what to do when a slave gets their tooth knocked out. You'll find a law about what to do when you find a spot of mold on your tent, depending on the color, what you're supposed to do. All of these laws just start to feel a little overwhelming. Why are these laws so specific, almost too specific? What is God doing here? This is what we need to understand. Many of the laws of God were paradigmatic. This means that specific examples were given in order that people with judgment and a good mind and heart would be able to take that law and figure out the general principle behind it, and in the process apply that principle more broadly to all of life. It was not possible to write a book that would cover every single eventuality. And so God would give these paradigm laws and say, now figure out what this means and how this applies from here. The funny part is, American society is pretty much the opposite. We try to have a law for every possible eventuality. Don't believe me? Just watch a medication commercial, right? You come to that part where they start racing through the list. And here's the one I'm just finding ever so humorous these days. More often than not, it begins by saying, if you're allergic to whatever prescription, don't take it. Oh, wow. And one of them is actually for a vaccine. If you're allergic to this one-time vaccine, don't take it. I'm like, how will I know until I take it? You know, you can't write a law for every little thing. Paradigmatic laws give a general principle that is to be applied in countless situations. The olive branches law, for example. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. God cares about the poor and the brokenhearted. You know what he's saying in that law? You don't have to get a buck for everything you own. You know, sometimes you want to get rid of something, you think, I could get $12 for this. Yeah, right, yeah. Ooh, yeah, $12. Or God's saying, why don't you just give it away? Now, this isn't an anti-garage sale verse. Okay, God loves garage sales. There was a time that, you know, I had to have a garage sale. I mean, I get that, but sometimes we clutch so hard to everything. $12, you know, oh good, now we can go buy a car. What? You know, sometimes we just say, here, it's yours. In part because they have a need, and in part because we have a need. We have a need to stop holding everything just like this. And so God gives that olive branch law to say, you don't always have to go back and get every last little scrap. Leave something for someone else. Go ahead and do that. Do you see how it becomes a paradigm? What happens for the legalist is they say, I wasn't harvesting olives, I was harvesting figs, so I better go out and get them all. No! He's saying this is a paradigm for all kinds of harvesting. Always ask this question, what's the broader, timeless principle behind the specific time-bound example? One last question. How do we know which laws are to be obeyed and which laws we don't have to obey? The Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, the whole Bible, is given for all of us. It is an error to think that the Old Testament is for the Jews and the New Testament is for Christians. The whole Bible is for all of us. Yet I have some confessions to make this morning, okay? Though the law says do not eat pork, I eat pork. I love pork, okay? When we go to Green Lake and I go up to that buffet line and they got that big old bag of bacon, I'm not kidding. You all are the ones that restrain me from taking all I want, right? There have been times, and I'm not joking, that I've stood there looking at that vat of bacon and thought, I am just going to pick this up and take it back to my seat, and I'm going to have one happy day. I love bacon. Law says I shouldn't eat bacon. I love shrimp. I could eat shrimp all day long. The Bible says you shouldn't eat shrimp. I celebrate Christmas and Easter and even the 4th of July. Yet though the law commands it, I have never once celebrated the Passover. Now we have one of two issues at play here. Either I am blatantly disobedient, or there are certain laws that are not intended to be obeyed. And by the way, don't be too quick to discount number one. We should always sincerely ask if I'm just dodging a law that I'm supposed to be obeying. But the Bible is clear through the teachings of Jesus, Peter, Paul, and others that certain Old Testament laws have realized their purpose. They've been fulfilled. They're no longer binding. The reason for which they were designed has been accomplished. So how do we know which ones are still in play and which ones are no longer binding? There are three basic kinds of law that Moses gives. First, he gives civil law or community standards, the laws that govern the people. He also gives ceremonial laws, religious practices, sacrifices, things that happen in the temple. And then he gives moral law, right and wrong, do and don't, thou shalt not. And I'll admit that these categories are not always clear-cut. But I think you'll find them helpful in answering the question of which to obey. I looked at the command about the Sabbath. You might look at that and say, well, that's a moral law, or maybe that's a ceremonial law. I think there's a sense in which, for that particular one, it's a little bit of both. So it's not always simple, but overall, the Gecko law, we probably don't have to obey the Gecko law anymore. I'll show you why. Since Christ, our relationship to the law has fundamentally changed. So let's break them down. Civil laws were given specifically to Israel. Because Israel was a nation and its ruler was God, we call it a theocracy, certain laws had to do with the way Israel specifically was to be governed. These laws had specific application to that nation alone. Now, that is not to say that a government in our time cannot look to the laws of the Old Testament for guidance, use them in a paradigmatic way, but there's nothing in the Bible that says every nation is to be governed the way the nation of Israel was governed. So those laws, while they can be helpful in understanding, are not laws that we have to continue to obey. Civil laws and community standards were Israel-specific, not required for now. What we are told in the New Testament, in Romans 13, 1-7, is we're to obey the laws of our country unless they clearly conflict with the law of God. We're always to obey that higher power of God. And by the way, understand that when we do obey that higher power, the consequences of that nation still might come to bear on us. Another kind of law is the ceremonial law, religious practices. These laws mostly involve worship, sacrifices, cleanness and uncleanness, that's where the Gecko law is, food laws, and laws like this. All of these laws have one specific purpose. They were pointing to the coming of the Messiah. They were showing us that Jesus was on the way. And when Jesus came, their purpose was realized. They were pointers. Jesus had arrived. When Jesus arrived, the pointers were no longer necessary. Jesus himself, in Matthew 5, 17-18, says, I have not come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill it. He was not coming to abolish the pointers. He was the reason the pointers existed in the first place. He's coming to fulfill the reason for the law. The final category is the moral law. And as you may have guessed, these are the laws that remain binding. The civil law went away when the nation went away. The ceremonial law was fulfilled in Jesus. But the moral law remains. The moral law does not morph, mold, or change as society's values shift. They are a timeless reflection of a timeless, unchanging character and nature of God. God never changes. His character is timeless. It never budges. The moral law is a reflection of his changeless character. These moral laws reflect the nature of God, who does not change. These laws remain. They are constant, they are consistent, and they are as timeless as he is. There was a moment, a significant moment in human history, that God took his finger and carved 10 laws into 2 stone tablets, the 10 Commandments. This moral law has impacted all of human history. The God who made these commands made a promise of a new covenant in Jeremiah 31. He said, I will put my laws in their minds. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their sins and remember their sins. For I forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. God is not looking for people who will dutifully live life according to a moral checklist. He has a vision for hearts that are fully devoted to him. He has a desire for people who follow the moral law instinctively, with joy and willingly, not because they have to, but because they want to, not motivated by the drudgery of duty, but the reality of a beautiful relationship. That's a law written on the heart. I obey, not simply because I must, but because I choose to, because I want to, because I love you, God. Have you had a Sinai moment? Have you had a moment that you stood at the foot of the mountain and you were in the presence a holy God. And as you thought about that holiness, it just started to overwhelm you as you realized how messed up you are. You had a moment like Isaiah that while you may not have used these words, because we don't these days, you would say, woe is me, I am undone. I'm a mess. And rather than saying, I got to try harder, I got to do better, I got to make this right, you said, God, I can't do it. I need you. And you embraced the grace that the Holy God of heaven was offering you through his son Jesus. You realize Jesus came and Jesus died so that you could finally be touched by the holiness of God. Every one of us needs that Sinai moment. Every one of us needs that moment. Some of you, as you go through this Thanksgiving week, I hope that at some point you will stop and you'll think about your moment at the bottom of the mountain and you will just say, thank you, thank you, thank you. I was a mess. And you rescued me. And now I obey you not because I have to, but because I want to, because I love you. And for others who still need to have that moment, why not let this be the week that you do? Express to God the thankfulness you have, that his grace makes you holy just like our Father. And it's the only way to receive that holiness. Father God in heaven, bring us to the foot of the mountain. Allow your holiness to scare us. And yet to realize that you are good. You are good and we embrace your goodness. We want to be like you in every possible way. In Jesus' name. I hope you have a very good Thanksgiving. I'll be intrigued if one or two of you don't try a little stuffed gecko this Thursday. It'll be quite a talking point, so we'll see you.